Thank you again for all of you for being here. It's a fun Thursday evening. Everybody has a beer in their hands. You're all ready to party. But just let me take a little bit more of your time to talk a little bit about something that we all deeply care about, which is our careers. So I'll be taking you on a little journey about how I I wouldn't call it a career ladder because ladder just implies upwards. It's more like a jungle gym, different directions. But I'm going somewhere with it. So I'd like to share that journey with you guys. So who am I? My name is Keerthana. Keerthana is a very intimidating Indian name, so KK works just fine. I'm from India, but I've been based in Munich for a couple of years now. I work mainly with React, JavaScript, and that kind of front end stuff. And I like to talk about the stuff that I work on. And this is the company I work for. So, no, I don't work for JetBrains. And my CEO was thrilled. He's like, "You're going someplace and you'll be talking about our company? Yeah, free marketing based on JetBrains." So, fun stuff happening all around, guys. Um, so at some point of time in the last couple of years, I came across this question, and that was, how do I get better at my career, right? I was going more and more deeper and deeper into this thing called software development. And I realized there's not many people at the top level who look like me, right? So I wasn't able to visualize that kind of a career growth the same way that somebody in a generation before me could. So one fine day, I went up to my manager and I asked him, "Hey, how did you become manager? What was the secret sauce?" And this is exactly what that gentleman told me. He said, "Oh, I've been working at this company for 8 years. One fine day, my manager saw me and like, you do some great job. Time for you to become manager." Now, 8 years he was with one company. I do not know anybody here if you've stayed with one single company for 8 years, but I think more and more staying at a company, I think 5 to 6 is slowly becoming the most I've heard, right? So if you do not stay in a company for that long, if you don't have that kind of loyalty, what are the other ways in which you can advance in your career, right? One thing that I thought of was, yeah, the next time I change, after 4, 5, 6 years, you feel it's time for a career change. And when you move, you could start looking for senior options, right? I would like to look for a senior role. I would like to go higher. It's easy to look for a senior role, but what are the things you need to do to feel like, okay, it's time to look for a senior role, right? When you're a junior developer and all you do is coding, or is all you do is development, what do you have to do to level up in that way? And these are a few of the things that I've noticed, at least for me, make me feel like, yeah, I am improving. I'm becoming a better engineer than I was a few years back. Because engineers, at the end of the day, we are not just people who write some code from Stack Overflow. We are people who solve problems. So how do you become a senior engineer? How do we build those skills to become senior? And there are some factors that you cannot control, right? If you've been discriminated against for some reason or the other, or if you've had to take a long personal day, those are things you cannot control. And they always exist for one reason or the other. I will be talking about a few factors that you can control, and really, at the end of the day, you do your best and you just leave the rest up to God, right? You do your best. So let me take you through some of the factors that you can control in your career journey and in your career growth. First thing I talk about is improving your code reviews, and I have a very good example for this. Now, in this example, if somebody in your team wrote this, the first and the easiest way is you can look at the code and you can say, "Hey, I don't think that's really that optimal. Maybe you can try to improve it a little bit." That's a perfectly fine code review comment. But how, if I were a senior engineer, how would I phrase it? And coming from sort of a JavaScript background, my comment would be, "Hey, you can use a switch, right? This is a very optimal case for a switch. So you can give a little code snippet, switch is what you would use. Maybe you have a case where you have the status active, but you also have the status go, right? You have different strings there. At that point of time, you can have another kind of a code where you have a little array and you check with includes. That's again a JavaScript example. This is a very code heavy example, and it will completely depend on which language that you work with. But I just wanted to give you an example for how you should deal with it, right? Be more specific with the way you give feedback. Be more, okay, here is a code example that you can give. Something like that which somebody can use instead of a generic statement of, hey, you can improve it. If you say you can improve it, the next question for a junior developer would be, how do I improve it, right? So when you give a very specific feedback with a code snippet, that'd be very useful. The second one is articulating your argument. When I mean articulating your argument, when you design something as a developer, when you design a solution, there are probably conditions that you think about when you're designing a solution. When you come across a code review comment, can you stand up for your design choices, right? Why did you choose your solution? Maybe right now, the solution that you've built for, somebody can comment saying, hey, we don't need this much complexity. We only have like 1,000 items in our data, and this is way too complicated the way you've dealt with it. But you can look at it saying, hey, right now, we shouldn't be building this for 1,000. Maybe our data set is going to expand to 100,000 or 100 million, and that's when my solution will make sense. So that's an argument that you're building for your solution, right? So when you have a decision that you make, and when you can articulate it, and when you can describe why you've made some design choices, I think that gives you a sense of, yeah, this is the reason why I'm doing it. Sometimes though, when, for example, when we go back to the example that I mentioned, if I wrote this code and somebody gave me some criticism, this is not the most better way to write this code, is there merit to that criticism? Of course. Maybe that's the time for me to switch or use an array or something like that. So don't dismiss it, just take it the right way and think about how can you build a better solution. The third one, I would say, is giving your solution before the problem arises. So I'm hoping most of you who are software developers here, you work with sprints or the agile kind of a cycle, right? And if you go through the standard agile cycle, you have, of course, the tickets that you're currently building, and then you have the tickets that's coming through, the sprint that you're grooming for the future, etc., right? So I think at some point when you've reached senior enough, it's time for you to step up saying, hey, that feature that we have upcoming, here is a solution, or here is a design that I think would work for it. If you have so much data coming in, I think we should filter some of the data based on these cases, and that would be a good kind of user experience for our users, right? When you know your system well enough to start suggesting something, and that's when I think people take notice of you and take notice of your solutions. You're confident enough to know your code base well enough to say, hey, this is a suggestion that I think is important for us. So that kind of a knowledge comes from, of course, some part of it is experience, but I think it's not that hard to go through like some architecture principles, or even go through like your entire code base and to see what are some patterns that I can duplicate to manage my data and my code base easier. So that does come from experience, but I've noticed that the more I start suggesting those things, the more I take myself more seriously as an engineer, as a person, not just as a programmer, but somebody who solves problems, right? So just for the first 3 points so far, I just wanted to give a little summation. So those are the things that you can do from yourself. One is to give a code review. One is to start making better solutions overall, and to take sort of the criticism or the things that come your way, make it something useful and learn from them. Now, 3 more points that I would add as something individualistic that you can do is, if you are going through code reviews and you get the same feedback again and again, hey, whenever you design a solution, you're capping the upper limit to 1,000 units, and we want you to think about 100 million or something like that. If that kind of feedback is coming again and again, take note of that, right? Use the frequent feedback that you've been given and use that in the next time you suggest a solution. So tracking the ways in which you build your product and tracking the ways in which you are suggesting solution and improving yourself, I think that's a fundamental key to improving your quality as an engineer, right? And the last point that I have for understanding a different point of view is sometimes we as software engineers, we only think of it in terms of the solution that we built, right? So if I go back to the example I mentioned about if I have a lot of data, filtering some of it, that might not be the case for us because we don't use the product. You know, we just build it, we test it for a few data, and that's it. But if we think about it in terms of the user, or if we think about it in terms of a product owner, what are some of the things that they would be wanting from this feature? So thinking about it from a very different point of view might help you think of some of the cases that you might want to tackle and might make you think about some of the ways in which you can improve your product. I think the most important part of becoming a better engineer at the end of the day is building a solution that works for different people, not just as just the parameters that have been given to you to build, right? So that's making it more robust and featured better. So those are the things, those are the individual things that you can do to get better as just the coding and the programming parts. What are some of the other things that you can take a look at and improve? A major factor in getting better at your career, I think, is the support system that you build. So for me, it was very important for me when I moved to Munich, because I came from a very different continent. It was very important for me to meet other software engineers in this area to understand a lot about the kind of ecosystem in Munich, right? How much do other software engineers make, so that when I have my next salary negotiation, I know how much I should negotiate for, right? What are the new improvements coming up in my area? Like how do you know that? Sure, you could read a couple of surveys, but I don't think anything beats meeting other software engineers in a place like this and talking about the problems that we face and we solve, right? So having that support system of your peers where you can talk about these problems, I think that's a really important key in getting better, right? How else would you know of interesting opportunities coming your way? How else would you know about a solution that you've been stuck at that maybe your teams in your company doesn't know, but somebody else has already solved this problem, whether it be login or no password or whatever it is, right? Meeting other people in your industry and creating that support system of people that you can talk to about your work, I think that's very fundamental in growing yourself and getting comfortable in this industry and in this field. So that would be something I really recommend to people. When I talk about mentorship, mentorship is not something that you receive from your peers or from your seniors, but one point at which you truly start feeling senior is when you provide mentorship to somebody who's new to your team, right? If the next person who joins your team is brand new and you're able to mentor them, right? You are comfortable enough in your code base and in your industry and in your company, like, hey, you're the new person, let me show you the ropes, right? That means that you've been there long enough and you're starting to mentor other people. I think that's a hallmark of becoming a senior engineer. You're comfortable enough to show other people the ropes, and you're comfortable enough if somebody else has an issue, like they come and talk to you because they think you have the solution, right? That's fundamental if you are becoming senior and growing in your career. So take initiative to solve issues, like that kind of whether it be in your team or in your company or be with other people. When you talk about your support system, having that kind of interaction with others and that kind of important interaction, I think that makes a huge difference in your career and how people view you as a leader in your company. Now, documentation is something that's always going to be complicated, and it would depend a lot on the pre-existing architecture that you have. Like if your company is a place where the code is like well documented and you have a lot of opportunities to add more to it, more power to you. But if your company is anything like the few that I've previously worked on, documentation is always something that's just not enough. So that's always an opportunity for you to contribute, take a look at what is available, and then see, okay, how can I make something more clearer for the people who want to use this API, right? So I think that's a very key part of whatever you do. Looking at the documentation, seeing where you can contribute, and especially when a junior or somebody new joins your company, coming in and showing them the ropes, I think documentation is really important there as well. So I would consider that as a part of these 2 points that I mentioned. Sharing ideas with your community, of course. Now, as I'm standing here talking to you guys about what I do, right? That's one way of sharing. But this is much larger community. You can always have like a little session with your team to talk about a new technology that you're interested in that your team could use. So having that kind of taking that kind of an initiative and having that kind of an interaction with your team, with your company, I think that's super important for you in your growth journey. So just to round up on some of the stuff that I have, mostly it's about the first part. The first 3 points is about the initiatives that you can do just by yourself. And the last two is more about how you in a company or in a community, how can you improve yourself or how can you establish kind of that leadership or that seniority in something. And that as much as you do things by yourself, you can read all of Stack Overflow, you can read all the documentation that you want. But at the end of the day, rather than being a rock star, I think software engineering is always going to be football. It's a team sport, right? So even if you're the best engineer that your company has, if you cannot work well with others, if somebody else has an issue, they can't come to you and say, hey, I'm facing something, can you help me out? If they don't have that confidence, do you think you can really become that kind of a leader? Do you think you can really advance in your career if you cannot cultivate those skills? So as much as programming and learning about the technology is important, I believe the latter half of building that community, building that mentorship with people around you, and building that kind of comfort in your team and in your community, I think that will go a large way. And even if you are not a 90% engineer, even if you do have to Google some things, if you are a person who others feel more comfortable approaching and people feel more comfortable interacting and pair programming, I think that makes a huge difference to how people perceive you as a leader and as a senior member and as an engineer, as somebody who solves problem. I think that makes a huge impact on your perception in that way. So that would be my key suggestion to anybody looking to further their career. How can you look around you, right? In your team, in your community, in your company, how can you take leadership and show people, hey, I am senior. Like, it starts from you. I am senior enough. If I were a senior person tomorrow, what would be the things that I'm doing? Right? The ideal case. If somebody had an issue for some part of the code and they didn't really have, sure, maybe you don't know everything, but you're game to go help them. Check it out. Right? Isn't that what a senior engineer would do? I'm sure there are some senior engineers in title who wouldn't do that, but in an ideal case, that's what we're talking about, right? So there are some factors, as I mentioned in the beginning, there are factors that you cannot control. You could be doing all of these things in your company and just not be getting further along. I guess that's the time to change your company. That's a factor that you can control. Changing the mindset of people in your company is not something that you can control. But furthering yourself, furthering your skill set, furthering how approachable that you are to people, those are factors that you can control. So I hope some of these points are helpful to you. And I have a bonus points. The bonus point is to share your ideas, which like I'm doing right now. So you don't need to get up on a scary stage and under a harsh light and talk to people to do it. You can write a blog post and share it. you can always have a little YouTube video and give out your ideas. You could always write documentation for an open source project that we all use, but we really don't want to write. So there are multiple ways in which you can contribute, and make sure that however you choose to contribute, your visibility is high, right? If you're doing a talk, of course, all the people who are forced to listen on an 8:30 on a Thursday, that's pretty high visibility, even though I do see your faces and you're like, when is it time for beer? Come on, I know all of this. So that's there. But you could always write a blog post and share your ideas. And I'm not saying that the first blog post you write, everybody in your company will be like, that blog post that you wrote, we all used it. Very informative. No, probably not the case. But there might be one or two people who reach out to you like, hey, that blog post you wrote, I was stuck with that problem for like 2 weeks and that really helped. Thank you. So it might be one or two people, but that's really rewarding, right? So slowly, you start from small steps, and hopefully with continued learning and some of the tips that I've given you, you have some idea on what to do next. And I have a very cliched catchphrase to end on. So this is very cliched, I understand that. But I myself, these are some of the things I use and I've been happy with using. And at some point of time, I don't feel like it's the point that you reach and you stop right there. But continuously, you keep on improving your skills, whether it's people skills, technical skill, whatever it is. And slowly, at some point, when people ask you, hey, there's a senior role open, I'm like, yeah, think I'm gonna apply for it because I'm senior. I'm confident in myself. So hopefully you keep on applying this, you keep on doing this, and you've perfected those skills. That's all from me today. Time for you guys to get your beer. Thank you so much. So I do have a few minutes. I designed this to be 25 minutes, not completely 30, because this is it's not really a technical kind of a topic. So if anybody has questions that they want to ask, it's open. But I understand, I don't want to pressure anybody to talk in front of an audience. That's my job, not you. Did we accidentally tell everybody there were cocktails here and they reached here and they're like, oh no, it's a talk, not cocktails. That's what I was promised. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for a wonderful presentation and talk. It was very inspiring. So, assuming that now you became a senior engineer, so what do you enjoy doing as a senior developer engineer?
For me, the most rewarding part is actually the part where other people come up to me and ask me for help. I know that sounds incredibly narcissistic, but then again, I'm speaking up here and making all of you listen. So who's surprised? Uh, when I started my own career, there were people in my team who they were excellent people, but I felt hesitant approaching them. I'm like, I have such a stupid doubt. How can I even ask this person? They're so senior. But nowadays, there are people in my team who they have the same question. Like, this is a very stupid doubt, but they come and they feel comfortable trusting me and asking me those questions. And whenever I hear somebody start that, this might be very stupid, but and when I'm able to help them, I feel really proud of myself and I feel really satisfied with that. So that's like my biggest reward being at this level. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Directly adding to that, so how are you able to achieve those kind of atmosphere where you enable your peers or junior developers to actually ask those questions so that they don't feel stupid or anything like that?
Yeah, thank you. That's excellent. One part is some part of it you just cannot control. Like at some point when you're in a meeting or something, somebody asks you, and some days you're just in a bad mood and you're caught off guard and you might say something stupid. So that part you cannot control. But some points in which in your company, if you can build a culture of, and I know some companies have this, I was part of a company where we had something like this, that every sprint there's one day where you're able to work on a project that you care about or something like that. There's like one day or a few hours every set weeks where you have some informal time to work on something, right? So if you kind of build that culture in your team to ask questions, or if you're starting with a brand new software, like imagine you have a website and you're moving to React JS, and you're the person who started that transition, and 2 years down the line people know, okay, she's the person who started React, so if I have a question, you're the person to ask. So it doesn't happen overnight. It's a bunch of really small steps. What you could do as a person is, if your company encourages that kind of an individual project or individual session, take an initiative to hold a session, right? Hey guys, I know we are planning to move to React JS. I did some investigating, and here is a half-an-hour session of some of the React JS features that I really liked. Maybe we can have a discussion. So if you do that kind of an initiative, people do feel comfortable doing that. And I did something like that. At some point, we were looking for a date, time, library or something, and I did a little presentation of a few that I researched. And that's small steps, but I hope that helps.
I have one more question. Maybe it sounds quite weird, but how do you feel? How do you motivate myself not to stop and to move forward? Because of course, becoming senior software engineer, it's whatever the first goal which everyone wants to, but it's not the end. It's only part of the beginning, and then there's things to go ahead. So how you keep yourself not to burn out, to move forward, to go to architect or whatever.
Again, thank you for the question. So there are different paths available when you start this journey, right? I think really traditionally it has been that once you reach a certain point of seniority, they make you manager, and now you manage people, not code anymore. But more and more companies are starting to recognize that there are people, even when they have reached a certain seniority, they just don't want to deal with people. They want to deal with code. So one part of that, it's true. I've met those people, they're like, please don't make me talk to people. I'd rather deal with code, So one part of that is company culture. You need to have a talk with your management when you have that semi-annual thing with your boss where they're like, hey, let's talk about next year. What do you want? That's the time when you have to say this out loud. Like, I don't want to move to management. I don't want to do Jira. None of that stuff. I still want to keep on coding. So that is that kind of a path that you want. You do have to take initiative. Now, for the second part of that, which is about burnout and stuff, I think burnout happens when you don't let yourself have enough fun. This is just my theory about it. Different people have different ideas, probably. For me, when I focus way too much about one thing and I don't let myself enjoy working with the code, I do burnout. Like if I'm having a problem with date time, I'm just going to pick an example. So we are having a problem with time zones, right? And I've been sitting at it stuck for a month and I've still not been able to find a solution. I think that's when I burn out, because I'm focusing on something, I cannot get an answer, and I'm trying again and again and again. So at the end of the day, there's no one size fits all solution to this. You have to really figure out what works for you. Maybe some people enjoy that kind of a difficult problem to deal with, but sometimes like you realize, okay, time to take a break, trying to focus on something else. Maybe this is just not the problem for me to solve, So whatever works for you, that's probably a very individual process to figure it out. But yeah, thank you.
So I hope this question doesn't come off as negative. Like, why do you think that so little women, percentage of women are in the higher position? And do you face any challenges? Do you think that women face more challenges than men or the genders to become other position than they want?
That is a very interesting question, but I don't think I can answer that in even half an hour, let alone 2 minutes, which I am being given right now. So, historically, based on a lot of research that people way smarter than me have done, there does seem to be some bias towards women. But personally, have I faced some of it? Yes. And that's also why at the beginning I said there are some factors that you just cannot control. If somebody has a bias against you, whether it be you're a woman, you're a person of color, religious minority, whatever it is, that's not something that you can control. So personally, I just don't look at it because it bums me out. So it's really not my vibe. I'm really sorry about that.
Okay, thank you.
I think everybody's tired out. That's okay, you guys. It's 9. You can start the party. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. I hope it was useful. Thank you.